EDU4EPP Assessment Task 2 Case Analysis of Teacher Conduct. This episode is brought to you by the Ethical Educators podcast. Miss Mobus will be featured to discuss the legal requirements that Australian teachers must comply with. Mr. Abraham will host this episode to unpack the Victorian Institute of Teaching's moral codes and describe the difference between serious misconduct and serious incompetence. Educational researcher Mr. Davey will discuss the Code of Conduct and examine the ethical paradigms in teachers' professional decision-making. Miss Pollock will be joining us on the podcast to discuss the teacher's responsibility of providing a duty of care to her children. This episode will focus on Chris Adams' case that was brought to the attention of the VIT on the 20th of November 2015. After receiving complaints from parents and other teachers, the VIT conducted an inquiry into Adams' teaching decisions. On the 28th of June 2017, the VIT provided Adams with conditions on his registration, which included preparing a personal code of conduct and a reflective piece about what he had learned. Additionally, on the 9th of April 2021, a notice of formal hearing was ordered to address 12 allegations that occurred during 2014 to 2015. These allegations will be discussed in detail throughout the podcast to examine the legal, moral, and ethical implications that occurred due to Adams' teaching.
Hello, my name is Miss Pollock, and I have been invited to the Ethical Educators podcast today to discuss the wrongdoings of Chris Adams through the lens of a parent of a student in his care. As a parent, sending your child to school can be a daunting prospect. Of course, I was precautious with choosing the school my daughter would attend and gain her education, but I was also comforted with the confidence that the teachers with whom have the responsibility, sound practices, and formal education into child welfare would conduct themselves accordingly. They are the professionals at the end of the day, and my daughter would be in safe caring hands. Teachers and schools have adopted the welfare or duty of care of their students since the early years of the 20th century. As stated by Melanie, the expected standard and right of parents in absence of their child's company is that of a trained professional with the expertise of childcare and management. In absence of parental supervision, educators have the role of what Foster coins moral agents, who must act in accordance with the sanctions of their position. Standardized codes of conduct and ethical positions are to be held in esteem and routinely practiced, as they serve as a formalized promise that teachers alike are in a position to assume full trust, public confidence, and accountability. Us parents are meant to be comforted in the knowledge that teachers undergo multiple exposures to the ethical responsibilities their profession entails, and therefore it is not a confounding notion that teachers and schools in contemporary settings are held to a higher standard of care than that of child's parents. The Department of Education defines duty of care as the implementation of strategies designed to prevent reasonably foreseeable injuries, whether psychological or physical. Mr. Adams performed the antecedent for psychological stress and turmoil through his actions in the classroom with the Year 4 students. As stated in the conducted report, another parent complained that their daughter was uncomfortable providing a recount of the stories and actions undertaken during class time, often stating she felt bad for her friend, who would become upset and embarrassed as a result of her inclusion in these narratives. That often the stories ridiculed the students and put them into uncharacteristic situations, causing emotional distress and unease. After some probing, my child eventually and fearfully spoke of the stories being told during class time by her teacher. This was due to the request made to keep their storytelling and roleplay sessions a secret. As a parent, this causes a cacophony of sirens in my head. Although Mr. Adams did not overtly conduct the sessions with malicious intent, the undertone of sexuality and enforcing morality on impressionable children was clearly a conscious concern, and subsequently he requested for it to be kept a secret. She told me that her teacher said they should not tell others about the stories, and Mr. Adams was on multiple accounts inappropriately touching students, provided inappropriate reading materials, nicknames, comments, and behaviours. Although he was not charged or accused of grooming, the warning signs are present. The Department of Education state that grooming behaviour may include openly or pretending to accidentally expose the victim to nudity, sexual material, and sexual acts. I do not believe his intent was to sexually abuse these children, but as a parent, the secrecy surrounding these sessions and causing unease for my child is a major concern and opens a space for deeper thinking, and therefore I'm glad his behaviour was brought to light and questioned before all trust and accountability dissolved. At the core of Mr. Adams' misconduct was his blatant disrespect of parental preference of what their children are exposed to and when. The children in the class have varying realities in reference to what is right and wrong, what their emerging moral standpoint entails, and what their parents and greater community see as just. Mr. Adams, as a working professional, should be well aware and adept in utilising critical consciousness in regard to the manner in which these topics are broached. Mr. Adams' critical consciousness knows that each individual has a differing perspective of normal due to their life experiences, and it is not his role to expose taboo to children. As evident in Mr. Adams' recommended personal development, a session entailing the correct way to respectfully interact with classroom activities and learners while maintaining the appropriate behaviours has been planned. The session will include the recognition that students have different characters and sensitivities and the consideration of the perspective of parents and caregivers. I hope that these sessions bring forth a new consciousness to Mr. Adams' pedagogy and allow his practice to grow into an ethically sound professional.
Shapiro and Stefkovich have stated that laws relate to enforceable standards of behaviour that are necessary to abide by for social institutions to keep functioning. Additionally, laws provide governed rules and regulations that apply to all people with specific penalties if they are broken. Teachers must comply with the VIT Code of Conduct to protect the relationship of trust between their students and not cross any boundaries that could be defined as harassment. Ewing et al. Has described harassment as an unwelcome conduct that is physical, verbal, or non-verbal behaviour. Indeed, the VIT established the Adams Earn and Learn program outlined in Allegation 5 demonstrated serious misconduct as Adams endorsed massages from his Year 4 students during class. However, it can also be argued that Adams' behaviour demonstrated harassment towards his students. In an anecdote, a student explained how they felt pressured to massage Mr. Adams because they felt they had to do it as he was their teacher. This statement poses significant legal implications, as a clear power disparity existed between Adams and his students. Additionally, the Victorian government states that sexual assault can occur when an individual is manipulated into any unwanted sexual activity such as touching. While Mr. Adams was not found guilty of sexual assault, it can be argued that Adams' serious misconduct involved sexual harassment by examining how the students felt weird about Adams' inappropriate touching. Furthermore, Allegation 6 asserted that in 2014, Adams touched a student inappropriately whilst dancing with her in a ballroom style with one hand around her waist and one hand allegedly on her buttock. This allegation depicts characteristics of a sexual offence as children under the age of 12 years are legally regarded as not being able to give informed consent to any sexual activity such as inappropriate touching. Section 40 of the Crimes Act of 1958 also suggests that Adams' engagement with touching a student without consent is an offence that can be punished by the law. This behaviour, demonstrated by Allegation 6, claimed that in 2014 Adams would provide female students with free massages. This behaviour demonstrated significantly legal implications, as the Victorian Police has stated that this offence carries a maximum penalty of 10 years of imprisonment. Furthermore, Allegation 7 testified that in 2015, Adams asked a student out on a date during a mock interview. This behaviour and Adams' frequency of inappropriately touching the students demonstrates the significant legal implications of Adams' case. Schwimmer and Maxwell have argued that legislation provides statements of what the government expects of professionals, whereas codes of ethics relate to expectations that professionals have collectively agreed to expect of themselves. Therefore, this behaviour reflected ethical implications by not complying with the VIT Code of Conduct Principle 2.1, which states that teachers must comply with the law. The VIT Code of Conduct Principle 3.2 outlines that teachers must be aware of the legal requirements, including laws about protection of privacy. The Victorian Privacy and Data Protection Act of 2014 states that photographs, films, and other recordings of individuals are considered personal information and must be protected by privacy law. Therefore, schools must develop a policy for the disclosure of photographs by obtaining consent from parents or carers. However, after receiving consent to be photographed, these laws do not always protect people from misconduct. Allegation 11 states that Mr. Adams showed a video to the class of one of the female students performing a cartwheel and exposing her upper chest in 2014. In an interview, the student revealed that Adams screenshotted the video of her as her top came up when she wasn't there, which led her to feel very embarrassed. This behaviour was seen as unethical, as Adams' decision-making did not reflect the values of the teaching profession in regards to morality and what is considered to be the right thing to do. However, this video could also be perceived as child pornography, as Adams screenshotted a visual representation of certain parts of the minor's body. While it is not known if the purpose of this picture was sexual, it is clear that the picture was sexual in nature as it exposed the child's body. Section 70 of the Crimes Act of 1958 states that the statutory offence of possession of child pornography is at least 5 years of imprisonment. Additionally, the Victorian government states that making sexual comments about a person's body and being forced to watch pornography is a form of sexual assault or sexual harassment. This behaviour also produced moral implications, as it can be seen as predatory, which fails to abide by society's moral codes and informal social conventions or formal codes of conduct. Lastly, Article 13 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child states that children have the right to get to and share information as long as the information is not damaging to them or others. This photograph was intended to humiliate the student, which will lead into our next topic about the moral implications produced by this case.
Hello, my name is Mr. Ibrahim, and it is an honour to be on this podcast today. We have dived deep into the Chris Adams case while explaining duty of care, the accusations of what Chris Adams did in the classroom, and the legal implications that these actions had. Distinct from the legal side of this case, I will be explaining the moral implications by looking through the VIT Code of Conduct and explaining what serious misconduct and serious incompetence is. Morals are sets of values, purposes, and principles that affect those within a group. We can choose to deviate from the moral code, but we may no longer be welcome within the group. Moral codes are not like laws, and you will most likely not end up in court for breaching them. But for teachers, breaching the code of conduct or teaching standards, there will be consequences that are fit for the actions that have been made. The decisions that teachers must make should be ethical and professional. VIT has moral codes that help teachers in ethical decision making. They have regulatory powers of inquiry that allow them to investigate any breached acts. The investigations are based on competence and fitness to teach. The VIT Code of Conduct is given additional coercive powers as they are reinforced by the law. They have gathered expectations that a teacher must follow, and they have continued to expand with the inclusion of multiculturalism and social justice by expecting specific approaches towards gender, race, human rights, and the environment. We will be looking through the VIT Code of Conduct and explaining what moral codes have been breached, but first we'll be looking at the professional conduct section of the Code of Conduct. Principle 1.1 explains that teachers should provide opportunities for all learners to learn. As I was reading through the information of the case study and what the students were saying, I did notice that there were two words that kept repeating continuously, and that was embarrassing and uncomfortable. Part B of this principle addresses that the teacher maintains a safe and challenging learning environment. If the students are always uncomfortable, then the classroom is just deemed to be unsafe for the health and well-being of the students. Mr. Adams also breaches Part C, which is demonstrating cultural sensitivity by telling stories about a priest accidentally urinating on a character who is a student selected in the classroom, who startled him in the toilet. This can be offensive and culturally insensitive to those who highly view a priest. Principle 1.2 addresses that teachers treat their learners with courtesy and dignity, and promote participation and empowerment. Building an environment where respect is given to all the students is a key factor in achieving this, which is what is stated in Part A of this principle. Allegation 3, which is based on inappropriate written pieces made by Mr. Adams, had some harsh statements about women, like girls can fall to pieces over nothing, they are mentally weak, fragile, and get upset over nothing. And let's try and change them to be more like boys. Part C further explains how Mr. Adams should have protected learners from intimidation, embarrassment, humiliation, and harm. Unsuitable accusations like Mr. Adams touching a student inappropriately in front of class in Allegation 4, or showing a video to the class where one of the female students was performing a cartwheel and in the process exposing her upper chest. The students came out during this investigation describing it as embarrassing, once again, and upsetting. Also, Principle 1.5 says that teachers are always in a professional relationship with the learners, whether at the education setting where they teach or not. Multiple allegations stated that Mr. Adams inappropriately touched students during class on multiple occasions and gave students free massages, which is a clear breach of the Code of Conduct. We have now explained the serious misconduct of the accusations, but what is the difference between misconduct and incompetence? Serious misconduct refers to behavior or actions by an employee that are considered unacceptable and can lead to consequences. Serious incompetence refers to a lack of skills or ability to perform the job duties to an acceptable standard. Registered teachers are required to achieve and maintain an acceptable level of competence in their practice. Serious incompetence refers to a situation where a teacher is failing to meet the Australian professional standards of teaching. In the VIT Code of Conduct, Section 3 explains the professional competence that a teacher should oblige to. Principle 3.1 addresses that teachers value their professionalism and set and maintain high expectations of competence. With the evidence that we have seen from this case study and the actions of Mr. Adams, he is not committed to pursuing his own professional learning, and this case can be seen as serious misconduct and incompetent.
So in my recent research, I've been looking at understanding the discussion of ethics surrounding education and how the differing veins of ethics relate to a teacher's code of conduct. So in the case of the scenario we're discussing here today, Chris has violated multiple ethical positions and facets surrounding ethics in education, which I'll be going into more detail with very shortly. To understand how Chris breached society's understanding of ethics, we have to first discuss what ethics are actually defined as. According to the Australian Ethics Centre, ethics are defined as a branch of philosophy that involves a process of reflection in which people's decisions are shaped by their values, principles, and purpose rather than unthinking habits, social conventions, or self-interest. The Ethics Centre continues on by establishing that while each person is able to reflect and discover their own sense of what's good, right, and meaningful, the course of human history has seen different groups unify around different sets of values, purposes, and principles. Now with the general understanding of ethics under our belt, we can now more acutely discuss the specific ethics surrounding teaching and education, and then using this discussion, identify the ethical breaches that Chris displayed during his multiple examples of misconduct as a teacher. So ethics in education can be classified into 4 branches or paradigms: the ethic of justice, the ethic of critique, the ethic of care, and the ethic of profession, all identified by Shapiro and Stefkovich within their book Ethical Leadership and Decision-Making in Education, Applying Theoretical Perspectives to Complex Dilemmas. Chris's behavior and misconduct can be perceived to fall under breaches of the ethic of care and the ethic of profession, as I will now be detailing further. As Shapiro and Stefkovich assert, the ethic of care suggests that students are at the center of the educational process and need to be nurtured and encouraged. Furthering this assertion, Shapiro and Stefkovich continue by suggesting that questions a teacher can ask themselves in order to consider their ethic of care can follow along the lines of, who will be hurt by my actions, and what are the long-term effects of the decisions I make today? The Victorian Institute of Teaching's decision that Chris was unfit to teach came as a result of his behaviour that compromised the safety of his students, with his actions harming them, and the long-term effects of his decisions within his classroom being potentially extremely damaging. Chris faced 11 allegations of misconduct or serious misconduct, some of which include using his mobile phone to play games in class, playing violent passages of a film, and making remarks about a female student within his classroom. I believe that Chris's failure to consider the long-term effects of his decisions within his classroom and a lack of understanding that his actions hurt certain students within his classroom is a partial reason as to why he violated the ethical principles that he did. Another ethical breach that Chris was involved within was the ethic of profession. As Shapiro and Stefkovich outline, the ethic of profession can be described as an educator making ethical decisions in light of their best professional judgment. A judgment that places the best interest of the student at the center of all ethical decision-making. If we are to follow this proposal by Shapiro and Stefkovich, we can see that Chris's behavior and decorum within his classroom clearly does not put his students' best interest at the center of his ethical decision-making, and thus he has made a clear violation of the ethic of profession. Shapiro and Stefkovich again raise questions such as, what would the profession expect me to do? What does the community expect me to do? And what should I do based on the best interests of the students in regards to the ethic of profession? In the case of Chris, his violations of the ethic of profession and his failure to understand how his serious misconduct involving his female student and other behaviours exhibited within the classroom are neither what his profession or his community's what his community expects him to do. They are extremely far removed from his students' best interests. Chris's actions within his classroom also do not align with the VIT's Victorian Teaching Professions Code of Ethics, as Chris's decision to make remarks about his female student violated his integrity and responsibility through a failure to maintain a professional relationship with a learner and not behave in a manner that maintains or advances the profession. Ultimately, Chris's concept of ethics will need to be professionally and appropriately established as he moves forward in the professional sphere, and in my opinion, his actions will need intense ethical reflection if he is to continue working in the education industry.
In 2017, the panel proclaimed that Adams was presently fit to teach. However, Adams' teaching decisions generated many legal, moral, and ethical implications, which led the VIT to impose a professional development program. This program included 6 sessions over a duration of no less than 3 months to help Adams explore the requirements of the Victorian Teaching Code of Conduct. Adams was also required to identify a mentor with at least 5 years of teaching experience and participate in monthly sessions with the mentor for at least 12 months. Lastly, the VIT identified that Adams must provide reports every 3 months to address the concerns raised by his allegations.